In this video, we're going to talk about the physiology of the kidney. And the best place to start with that is the nephron. Now, the nephron is the functional unit of the kidney. And in each kidney, we're going to have millions of nephrons. And these are groups of cells and blood vessels that work together to do a common function. And that function is to filter the blood. Now, a nephron is basically a blood vessel at one end and a series of coiled tubes that go around a capillary. That's essentially what it is, and I'll show you a picture in the next slide. The very beginning of what we think of as the beginning of the nephron is going to be a bulb known as the Bowman's capsule. Okay, and inside that Bowman's capsule is going to be a whole bunch of blood vessels that are kind of knotted up, and we call that knotted blood vessel a glomerulus. Now, the glomerulus is supplied with blood via two different arterioles. The first one, the afferent arteriole, brings the blood in to the glomerulus where it's filtered. When the blood leaves the arteriole, it leaves through the efferent arteriole, and it basically leaves with just cells and large proteins. Everything else that's in the plasma, most of the fluid, is going to be drained into the nephron. As blood moves through these tubules, and the peritubular cavities are going to have a whole bunch of capillaries there. We're going to remove some of this stuff from the tubules to get it back into the blood, or we're going to get rid of stuff into the tubules so that it gets excreted as urine. It sounds a bit confusing now. I'll show you a picture and hopefully it'll make a little bit more sense. So here's a look at our nephron over here. Okay, let's start off with the Bowman's capsule. Let me get a better color. Bowman's capsule, and then inside of this is going to be this red knot of blood vessels. That's going to be our glomerulus. So that's where we'll start with the nephron. The next section starts right here, which is the closest to the glomerulus, and it ends about right here. So if you follow that tube, this area right here is going to be what we call the proximal convoluted tubule. Okay, so it's a tubule, it's a tube, a hollow tube. It's convoluted. Convoluted means twisted, and proximal means close. So it's close to the glomerulus, so we call that the proximal convoluted tubule. You'll often see that abbreviated as the PCT, proximal convoluted tubule. Okay, now if we move on to the next section of the nephron, ending at the proximal convoluted tubule about right here, and then ending over here, we have the loop of Henle. So the loop of Henle consists of a descending limb, and that's going to be this part right here. It's going down, descending, and it's going to be the ascending limb, which comes back up. So that's the loop of Henle, two parts, the descending and the ascending loop. After we get through the loop of Henle, we're going to move into the last part of the nephron, which would start about right here and end right here. So we follow this progress. This is going to be the distal convoluted tubule. So distal means it's going to be far away from the glomerulus. Convoluted, twisted tubule, which is the tube. So if we were to trace the whole path of the nephron, starting right at the beginning, we would start out here in the glomerulus, which would drain into the Bowman's capsule. The fluid would then go from the proximal convoluted tubule through the descending loop of Henle, back through the ascending loop of Henle, around through the distal convoluted tubule, and finally end up into a common, what we call collective duct. If you look at this collecting duct, you'll notice that there's little branches that stick off of it. Each one of those little branches is going to have another nephron hooked up to it. So the collecting ducts can take the formed urine from a bunch of different nephrons. One thing that you should point out, and if you go back to the talking about the structure of the kidney, let me erase those doodles before we go on any further. When we're talking about the structure, how these work, the a lot of the Bowman's capsule and the convoluted tubules, they're all going to be in the cortex of the kidney. So everything up here will be in the cortex. And the loop of Henle, descending and ascending, this is all going to be in the medulla. Now the reason why that's important is because the cortex and the medulla have different osmotic concentrations, and this allows different things to move into and move out of the tubules. So it allows us to use osmosis, which is passive transport, to create and concentrate or dilute our urine depending on how we need it at that particular time. So if we go back to, if we come back to this picture here, again we can see our single nephron, the glomerulus, the Bowman's capsule, then we've got the proximal convoluted tubule, the descending and then the ascending loop of Henle, and then we get the distal convoluted tubule, which hooks into the collecting duct. Now each one of those collecting ducts are going to empty into the renal pelvis, and if you think back to the last video, the renal pelvis is going to be this area of the kidney on the inside in here. If we look at this picture right here, we'll be able to see that this is going to be the medulla in this area, and this is going to be the cortex. So the glomerulus, the proximal convoluted tubule, and the distal convoluted tubule are all going to be in the cortex, while the descending and ascending loop of Henle are going to be in the medulla. So if I draw that line over here, this is going to basically separate out the cortex on the top from the medulla in the bottom. Okay. All right. So let's have a really quick look at the figure down here in the bottom corner. So when we look at this, now we can see the nephron in contact with the blood vessel. Okay, so we can see the different parts of the nephron, but we can also see how there's blood capillaries wrapped around each one of those tubules. And having that tubule really close to the capillaries like that, we're going to be able to move stuff back into the blood, or we're going to be able to move stuff from the blood back into the kidney tubules in the nephron. Depending on the condition of our body and how we want to form the urine, this is what the nephron does. Okay, so the process of urine formation is, it takes place in 4 steps, okay? The first one is glomerular filtration, and this is when blood flows into the glomerulus. It's under pressure because it comes directly from the aorta, and things pass out of the blood and they get collected into the capsule, the Bowman's capsule that surrounds the glomerulus. So this is actually filtration of the blood. The stuff that most of the things that are in the blood, except for large proteins and cells, will get taken out of the blood and it will get pushed into the tubules of the nephron. Now, the next step is going to be tubular reabsorption. Now, once the blood is filtered, once the fluid leaves the blood capillaries and moves into the Bowman's capsule, into the nephron, we don't call that blood anymore, we call it filtrate. And our kidneys are so efficient that they produce between 160 and 180 liters of filtrate a day. So that's how many times your blood is filtered. We only have about 7 liters of blood in a large human body. So the fact that it gets filtered to the point where we produce between 160 and 180 liters, that is an absolute massive amount of filtration. There's 2 words that you're going to need to make sure you have a good definition of before we go on. Reabsorption and secretion. Okay? Now, reabsorption is going to mean that we take stuff from the filtrate and that goes to or back into the blood. Okay? Secretion is when we take things from the blood or the tissues and we add that into the tubules or we add it back to the filtrate. So it's really important that you understand what reabsorption and secretion is, okay? When we get to glomerular filtration, we take everything out of the blood and it goes into the tubule. Now, we don't want to lose everything that comes out of the blood. So what we do is we reabsorb it from the tubule, from the nephron, back into the blood at the capillaries that surround the nephron, okay? So essentially, we collect most of the things that we filtered out, we collect back into the blood. The third step is going to be the tubular secretion. Now, when we collect stuff back into the blood, maybe we don't want everything that we reabsorbed. So when we secrete stuff, what we're doing now is we're taking stuff that we don't need anymore or don't want, we're taking it from the blood and we're putting it back into the nephron. Now remember, anything that goes into the nephron is going to end up as urine. So if we don't need this extra stuff, we put it back into the nephron, into the filtrate, and it'll get evacuated from the body as urine. And then the fourth step here is going to be the concentration of the urine. So before the urine leaves the nephron and gets into the collecting duct, the water content of the urine is going to be monitored closely. We don't want to lose a lot of water. We want to keep as much as we can. And we'll also regulate a few other things on the end there to help our blood pressure, to help our fluid balance, and so on and so forth. And a lot of that is going to be regulated by the hormone, antidiuretic hormone, that we learned is produced by the kidney. By the pituitary gland. So this is the first step. This is our, like we talked about in the last video, the last slide, sorry. This is step number 1, glomerular filtration. So blood will come in through here. It'll move through these capillaries. Let me switch to a different color. It'll move through these capillaries. When it does, then stuff is removed from the blood and it collects inside the nephron. Then the blood leaves through the efferent arteriole, and basically we're left with cells and large proteins. The rest from the blood that comes out of the plasma is going to be collected in here, and it's going to move through or start moving through the nephron. So this isn't exactly a perfect drawing of a nephron, obviously, because it's stretched out. But this will go through the 4 different steps that we talked about. So we just talked about the first one, glomerular filtration. The second one is going to be reabsorption from the filtrate. So remember, everything is absorbed or filtered from the blood, starts to travel through the nephron. The stuff that we want, we're going to reabsorb, and we take that from the filtrate and we bring it back into the blood. Okay? Now, depending on the condition of the body, we may not want all of this stuff. So in turn, we'll probably put some of it back into the nephron, and whatever is in the nephron as it travels through, this is going to become urine. Okay? At the final part here, step 4, we're going to adjust the urine so that we keep as much water as we need at that particular time, and that's going to be controlled by antidiuretic hormone. So antidiuretic hormone is probably going to take a lot of the water back from the urine so that we don't lose a lot of our water through when we urinate. So antidiuretic hormone, ADH, it's going to be released from the pituitary gland, and what it does is it controls how concentrated the blood is. So if the blood becomes more concentrated, what will happen is ADH will be released, and that will reabsorb some of the water so that the urine becomes more concentrated. So we end up with a small volume of concentrated urine, so quite dark yellow urine. If blood is quite diluted, we won't have as much ADH present, and the urine becomes less concentrated. One thing that we'll often see in diabetic patients is we'll see inadequate secretion of ADH. So they won't have as much ADH, and that's going to become a problem when it comes to regulating the volume of their urine as well as the concentration of their urine.